Come. Your mind has been running without rest, and you can feel the weight of it. What if the exhaustion is not from life, but from carrying what was never yours to hold? What if peace is not found by thinking harder, but by trusting deeper? Many lose clarity not because God is silent, but because the mind is too loud. This message will show you how to stop overthinking and start resting. Listen carefully, because one shift in trust can restore the peace you've been missing. Mental tiredness is one of the most common, yet least understood struggles people face. You can be physically rested and still feel exhausted within. The mind becomes tired when it carries burdens it was never designed to hold. Thoughts begin to multiply. Questions repeat themselves, and worry disguises itself as responsibility. This is where many people lose peace, not because life is heavy, but because the mind refuses to rest. Overthinking is not a sign of wisdom. It is often a sign of fear. The mind keeps revisiting scenarios in an attempt to control outcomes. People replay conversations, anticipate problems that may never happen, and mentally solve situations beyond their capacity. This constant activity drains emotional strength and clouds judgment. The mind becomes noisy because trust has been replaced with control. Trust is the cure for mental exhaustion. Trust does not mean ignoring reality. It means acknowledging limits. When you trust God, you admit that there are outcomes you cannot manage and timelines you cannot force. This admission is not weakness. It is alignment. The moment responsibility is returned to God, the mind begins to quiet. Peace enters not because problems disappear, but because the burden has shifted. Many people pray yet remain mentally restless because prayer becomes another form of control. They pray anxiously. They're trying to force certainty instead of releasing care. True prayer leads to rest. It is the moment you say, I have done what I can, and I leave the rest with God. When prayer ends without rest, trust has not yet been activated. God's provision operates most effectively when the heart is calm. Anxiety interferes with discernment. A tired mind struggles to recognize direction. Rest sharpens spiritual sensitivity. When the mind is still, guidance becomes clearer. Decisions are no longer rushed, and reactions become measured. This is why rest is not optional. It is necessary for accuracy. Rest does not mean inactivity. It means freedom from inner pressure. You can be busy and still be at rest internally. Rest is the confidence that God is working even when you are not thinking about the problem. It is trusting that provision is not dependent on constant mental engagement. Many breakthroughs are delayed not because God is silent, but because the mind is too loud to hear. Mental fatigue often comes from trying to predict the future. The mind attempts to prepare for every possible outcome, but this preparation only multiplies fear. God never asks you to manage the future. He asks you to trust Him one step at a time. When focus shifts from what if to God is faithful, peace begins to return. Rest is an act of faith. It declares that God is reliable. It says, I may not see the whole picture, but I trust the one who does. This kind of rest protects emotional health, strengthens faith, and restores clarity. Without rest, even blessings become overwhelming. With rest, even challenges become manageable. When the mind is tired, that the answer is not more thinking, more planning, or more worrying. The answer is surrender. Trust recalibrates the mind. It slows the noise, settles the heart, and restores balance. When you stop overthinking and rest in God's provision, their peace becomes your portion. clarity becomes your guide, and strength returns from a deeper place than effort. Calm. Mental exhaustion often begins when a person takes on responsibilities that were never meant to be carried by the human mind alone. The mind was designed to think, reason, and discern, but not to sustain endless pressure. When life presents uncertainty, calm, many people respond by holding everything tightly, believing that constant thinking will prevent failure. Over time, this habit turns into a burden, and the mind becomes tired not from lack of rest, but from excess weight. Calm, carrying what should be surrendered, creates inner tension. The mind stays active even in moments meant for rest. Calm, thoughts replay, scenarios are rehearsed, and possible outcomes are analyzed repeatedly. That this constant mental activity gives the illusion of productivity, but it actually drains strength. The exhaustion comes from the effort to control what lies beyond human capacity. When a person refuses to surrender outcomes, peace becomes impossible. Mental tiredness is often misunderstood as weakness, but it is usually a warning. It signals that the soul is overloaded. Many people ignore this signal and push harder, assuming that endurance means carrying more. In reality, endurance sometimes means letting go. The mind reaches exhaustion when it is forced to replace trust with control. This replacement demands energy that the mind was not designed to supply continuously. The weight of unsurrendered responsibility shows up in different ways. Sleep becomes shallow, focus decreases, calm and emotional reactions become sharper. Small issues feel overwhelming because the mind is already strained. Calm, decisions become harder, not because options are unclear, but because mental energy is depleted. This exhaustion affects spiritual sensitivity as well, making it harder to discern guidance or hear direction. Many people carry responsibilities because they feel obligated to fix everything. They believe that if they stop thinking about a problem, something will go wrong. This belief keeps the mind alert even when the body is at rest. However, this sense of obligation often masks fear. Fear of failure, fear of disappointment, or fear of loss drives the need to stay mentally engaged at all times. This fear-driven thinking creates exhaustion. Surrender is often misunderstood as passivity. But it is an intentional release. It is acknowledging that some outcomes are beyond personal control. When responsibilities that belong to God are surrendered back to Him, the mind experiences relief. This relief is not immediate freedom from problems, but freedom from carrying the weight of them. The mind begins to rest because it is no longer trying to manage the uncontrollable. Mental exhaustion also reveals misplaced identity. When people tie their worth to outcomes, they feel responsible for ensuring success. Failure feels personal and uncertainty feels threatening. This pressure keeps the mind active. Surrender corrects this by shifting identity away from performance and toward trust. When worth is no longer tied to outcomes, the mind relaxes. The habit of carrying what should be surrendered often develops gradually. It begins with concern, then becomes worry, and eventually turns into constant overthinking. Each stage increases mental load. By the time exhaustion sets in, the mind has been under pressure for a long time. Recognizing this pattern is important because it shows that rest will not come from external changes alone, but from internal release. Surrender creates space for peace. Peace is not the absence of responsibility, but the absence of pressure. When the mind stops striving to control outcomes, clarity returns. Thoughts become organized instead of chaotic. Emotional balance improves because the mind is no longer overstimulated. This is how trust begins to heal mental fatigue. Ultimately, mental exhaustion is not just a need for sleep. It is a call to surrender. It invites the person to release what was never meant to be carried and return it to God. When responsibility is placed back where it belongs, the mind regains strength, clarity is restored, and rest becomes possible again, even in the midst of unresolved situations. Overthinking is often praised as intelligence, but in reality it is frequently a symptom of misplaced control rather than wisdom. True intelligence brings clarity and direction, while overthinking produces confusion and paralysis. When the mind constantly revisits the same thoughts without resolution, it is not processing information effectively. It is attempting to control outcomes that are uncertain. This desire for control is what transforms normal thinking into exhausting mental loops. The mind overthinks when it feels responsible for guaranteeing results. People replay conversations, analyze every possible response, and imagine multiple future scenarios in an effort to prevent mistakes or pain. This behavior is not rooted in insight but in fear. Fear drives the mind to believe that constant analysis will create safety. However, safety cannot be manufactured through endless thought. Instead, this habit drains emotional energy and increases anxiety. Overthinking also stems from mistrust. When trust is absent, the mind tries to compensate by working harder. It assumes that if it can predict every outcome, it can avoid disappointment. This assumption is flawed because many outcomes are beyond human influence. The mind was never designed to foresee everything. When trusting God is replaced with self-reliance, overthinking becomes the default response to uncertainty. Another reason overthinking reflects misplaced control is that it confuses responsibility with ownership. Responsibility involves doing what is within your power, while ownership implies total control over results. Overthinking blurs this line. People begin to believe that if something goes wrong, it is entirely their fault. That this belief keeps the mind alert and restless, unable to release situations, even after reasonable effort has been made. Overthinking also disrupts discernment. A noisy mind struggles to hear direction. When thoughts multiply, clarity diminishes. Decisions become harder because every option feels equally risky. This mental clutter creates hesitation and delay, not because the path is unclear, but because the mind is overwhelmed. Control-driven thinking replaces trust-driven guidance, leading to frustration. Many people overthink because they fear uncertainty more than exhaustion. They prefer mental strain over the discomfort of not knowing. However, this preference keeps them trapped in cycles of worry. Overthinking gives the illusion of action, but it rarely produces solutions. Instead, it reinforces anxiety and erodes peace. Overthinking also affects emotional health. When the mind is constantly active, emotions become unstable. Small challenges trigger strong reactions because the mind is already overloaded. Patience decreases and irritability increases. This emotional strain further confirms the illusion that more thinking is needed, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. Trust interrupts overthinking by addressing its root cause. Trust acknowledges limits and accepts uncertainty without panic. It shifts the burden of control from the mind to God. This shift does not eliminate thought, but it restores order to it. Thoughts become purposeful rather than repetitive. The mind is allowed to rest because it is no longer responsible for managing outcomes. Letting go of overthinking requires humility. It means accepting that you cannot predict everything and that not every outcome depends on you. This acceptance feels uncomfortable at first, especially for those accustomed to control. However, as trust grows, the mind begins to relax. Silence becomes possible without fear. Overthinking is not a sign of deep thought, that it is often a sign of deep anxiety. Wisdom simplifies, while fear complicates. When control is surrendered and trust is restored, the mind regains clarity. Thoughts slow down, focus improves, and peace returns. Intelligence begins to function as it was designed, serving discernment rather than anxiety, and supporting rest rather than exhaustion. Trust is the doorway from mental strain to inner rest because it redirects the source of security. Mental strain develops when the mind assumes responsibility for outcomes it cannot control. The mind keeps working not because it is productive, but because it is afraid to stop. Trust interrupts this cycle by shifting dependence away from constant mental effort and toward confidence in God's oversight. When trust is activated, the mind no longer needs to stay alert to every possibility, and rest becomes possible. Inner rest does not come from answers alone, it comes from assurance. Many people believe that if they could just understand everything, peace would follow. In reality, understanding without trust often increases anxiety. The mind gathers more information but still feels unsafe. Trust provides assurance even when information is incomplete. It allows the heart to settle without requiring full clarity. Which is why it is the true doorway to rest. Mental strain is fueled by the belief that vigilance equals responsibility. People feel guilty when they stop thinking about a problem, as if rest itself is negligence. Trust redefines responsibility. It affirms that doing your part does not require constant mental engagement. Once effort has been applied where necessary, trust permits release. This release quiets the mind because the pressure to manage everything is removed. Trust also restores balance between effort and surrender. Without trust, effort becomes excessive. The mind keeps pushing, revisiting issues repeatedly, hoping that one more thought will produce certainty. Trust recognizes the boundary between action and surrender. It knows when effort ends and faith begins. This boundary is essential for mental health. When the boundary is crossed repeatedly, exhaustion follows. Another way trust leads to inner rest is by stabilizing emotions. Mental strain often produces emotional volatility. Anxiety, frustration, and fear fluctuate depending on circumstances. Trust creates emotional consistency. Even when situations remain unresolved, the inner state becomes steadier. This stability does not come from denial, but from confidence that outcomes are held by God rather than fragile human control. Trust also simplifies focus. Mental strain scatters attention across multiple possibilities. The mind jumps from one scenario to another, never settling. Trust narrows focus to what is present and manageable, instead of worrying about every future outcome. Attention is placed on the next faithful step. This simplicity reduces cognitive overload and restores mental clarity. Inner rest is sustained by trust because trust quiets the inner dialogue of self-criticism. Many people mentally punish themselves for perceived failures, replaying mistakes and imagining alternative outcomes. Trust interrupts this pattern by affirming grace. It allows the mind to stop rehearsing regret and move forward without condemnation. This release is essential for rest. Trust also changes how uncertainty is perceived. Instead of viewing uncertainty as a threat, Trust reframes it as space for God's involvement. This shift transforms anxiety into expectancy. Calm. The mind no longer rushes to fill every gap with speculation. Silence becomes safe. Stillness becomes restorative rather than uncomfortable. Trust does not eliminate thinking, it orders it. Thoughts become intentional instead of compulsive. Planning becomes strategic rather than anxious. Calm. Reflection becomes constructive rather than repetitive. This reordering allows the mind to function as it was designed, serving wisdom rather than fear. Inner rest grows as trust is practiced consistently. It is not achieved in a single moment, but developed through repeated surrender. Each time the mind chooses trust over control, rest deepens. Over time, mental strain loses its grip because the habit of trust becomes stronger than the habit of worry. Trust remains the doorway because it addresses the root of mental fatigue rather than its symptoms. Techniques may calm the mind temporarily, but trust reshapes its foundation. When the mind no longer carries what belongs to God, rest becomes natural. Peace settles not because life is predictable, but because trust is established, and that trust creates a quiet strength that sustains the mind even in uncertainty. God's provision operates most effectively when the mind is still, because clarity and receptivity are required to recognize what is already available. A restless mind is often focused on lack, danger, or uncertainty, which distorts perception. When the mind is crowded with fear and constant analysis, it becomes difficult to notice guidance, opportunities, and timely direction. Stillness creates space for awareness, allowing provision to be received rather than overlooked. Provision is not only about supply, it is also about discernment. Many times what God provides is direction, wisdom, or instruction rather than immediate material answers. A noisy mind struggles to receive these subtle forms of provision. Anxiety narrows attention and pushes the mind into survival mode where only immediate threats are considered. In this state, long-term solutions and gentle guidance are often missed. Mental stillness enhances spiritual sensitivity. When thoughts slow down, the heart becomes more attentive. This attentiveness allows for clearer recognition of promptings and insight. God often guides through peace rather than pressure. A still mind recognizes peace as a signal. While a restless mind dismisses it as impractical, stillness allows peace to be trusted as a valid guide. An anxious mind also tends to force outcomes. When fear is dominant, people rush decisions in an attempt to regain control. These rush choices can interfere with provision by creating unnecessary complications. Stillness introduces patience, which prevents premature action. Patience allows provision to unfold in its proper timing rather than being disrupted by haste. Stillness does not mean inactivity. It means freedom from internal agitation. A person can act decisively while remaining internally calm. This calmness allows actions to be guided rather than reactive. When the mind is still, effort becomes measured and effective. When the mind is restless, effort becomes scattered and inefficient. Provision also requires trust. Trust calms the mind by removing the pressure to anticipate every outcome. When trust is present, the mind no longer scans constantly for threats. This relaxed state improves problem solving and creativity. Many solutions emerge not during intense thinking, but during moments of rest. Stillness opens the door for insight that anxiety blocks. A still mind is better able to steward provision. Even when resources are present, anxiety can lead to mismanagement. Fear-driven decisions often waste what has been given. Stillness promotes wisdom, helping a person use provision effectively. This stewardship multiplies what is available rather than diminishing it through panic. Stillness also aligns with timing. God's provision often arrives at specific moments. A restless mind may act too early or too late, missing alignment. Stillness keeps a person attentive to timing rather than urgency. This sensitivity to timing ensures that provision is not only received, but applied correctly. Mental stillness protects against distraction. Anxiety pulls attention in many directions, causing people to chase multiple solutions at once. This divided focus reduces effectiveness. Stillness consolidates attention, allowing energy to be directed where it matters most. Focused effort increases the impact of provision. Stillness also restores confidence. When the mind is calm, confidence is grounded in trust rather than control. This confidence reduces fear-based decisions and supports steady progress. The person is no longer driven by the need to prove competence or secure outcomes through force. God's provision is often subtle rather than dramatic. It may come through conversations, ideas, or shifts in perspective. A still mind notices these subtle movements. Restlessness overlooks them. When the mind is still, provision is not only recognized but valued. Ultimately, stillness creates the environment in which provision can operate fully. It removes interference caused by fear and overthinking. When the mind rests, awareness sharpens, discernment improves, and guidance becomes clearer. Provision flows most freely where the mind is quiet enough to receive it and wise enough to apply it properly. Rest is often misunderstood as inactivity, but in truth it is a state of spiritual alignment. Laziness avoids responsibility, while rest assumes proper order. Rest acknowledges that effort has limits, and that beyond those limits, trust must take over. When a person rests in God, they are not withdrawing from life. They are repositioning themselves correctly within it. This repositioning allows strength, clarity, and peace to return without abandoning purpose. Laziness resists engagement, but rest supports it. A lazy person avoids responsibility because it feels burdensome. A rested person carries responsibility without internal strain. The difference lies in alignment. Rest recognizes that not everything depends on personal effort. It understands that some outcomes are sustained by divine provision rather than constant human pressure. That this understanding frees the mind from exhaustion while keeping the heart committed. Spiritual alignment means functioning according to design. The human mind was never designed to operate under continuous stress. It was designed to work in partnership with trust. When this partnership is broken, fatigue sets in. Rest restores that partnership by reconnecting effort with faith. Instead of striving alone, the person acts with the confidence that God is actively involved. The rest also corrects the belief that constant activity equals faithfulness. Many people stay busy because stillness feels unproductive or irresponsible. However, constant activity without rest often signals insecurity rather than diligence. Rest demonstrates confidence. It says that value is not measured by constant motion, but by alignment with purpose. This confidence stabilizes emotions and reduces anxiety. Rest as alignment also sharpens discernment. When the mind slows down, perception improves. Decisions become more accurate because they are no longer rushed. Laziness dulls awareness, but rest heightens it. A rested mind can recognize opportunities, warnings, and direction more clearly. This clarity prevents mistakes that arise from fatigue and pressure. Another aspect of rest is surrendering outcomes. Laziness avoids outcomes altogether. Come, while rest releases control over them. This release is not neglect, it is trust. Come, trust allows the person to stop rehearsing possibilities and start living faithfully in the present. This present, focused engagement restores mental and emotional balance. Rest also preserves strength. Without rest, even meaningful work becomes draining. Fatigue accumulates quietly until motivation collapses. Rest interrupts this decline by restoring inner resources. It renews perspective and prevents burnout. This renewal allows sustained effort over time rather than short bursts followed by exhaustion. Spiritual alignment through rest also impacts relationships. A tired mind reacts emotionally, while a rested mind responds thoughtfully. Rest improves patience, empathy, and communication. This relational stability is evidence that rest is active rather than passive. It produces fruit that laziness cannot. Rest also removes the pressure to perform. Many people feel valuable only when they are achieving. This pressure fuels overthinking and anxiety. Rest reminds the heart that worth is not earned through productivity. This assurance quiets the mind and restores confidence. When identity is secure, effort becomes healthier and more effective. Choosing rest requires faith because it contradicts the instinct to control. It feels risky to stop worrying, stop planning excessively, and stop anticipating every outcome. Yet this risk is necessary for alignment. Faith-filled rest trusts that God is working beyond visible effort. This trust creates space for peace to grow. Rest also teaches timing. Acting too soon or too late often causes problems. Rest allows for waiting without frustration. It creates patience that aligns action with proper timing. This patience protects from impulsive decisions driven by anxiety. Rest is not escape, it is engagement without strain. It keeps the heart available and the mind clear. When rest becomes a lifestyle, effort becomes sustainable and joy returns. Life begins to flow rather than grind. Rest restores balance between doing and trusting, ensuring that progress continues without the cost of constant exhaustion. Peace returns when responsibility is placed back on God, because the burden of control is removed from the human mind. Much of mental and emotional unrest comes from assuming ownership over outcomes that are uncertain and uncontrollable. When people believe everything depends on their decisions, planning, and vigilance, pressure becomes constant. This pressure slowly erodes peace, replacing it with anxiety and fatigue. Returning responsibility to God restores balance by acknowledging limits and trusting divine oversight. Responsibility placed on God does not eliminate personal effort, it redefines it. Effort remains focused on obedience, their faithfulness, and wise action, while outcomes are surrendered. This distinction is crucial for peace. When effort and outcomes are confused, the mind stays restless, constantly checking whether enough has been done. Placing responsibility back on God allows the mind to rest after obedience has been fulfilled. Peace is closely connected to trust. Without trust, surrender feels dangerous. The mind resists releasing responsibility because it fears neglect or failure. Trust reassures the heart that God is attentive, capable, and involved. This reassurance quiets the inner dialogue that constantly evaluates risks and consequences. The mind no longer needs to stay on high alert. Many people carry responsibility because they fear regret. They believe that if something goes wrong, it will be their fault for not thinking harder or preparing more. This fear keeps the mind active even in moments meant for rest. Placing responsibility back on God addresses this fear by accepting that not every outcome can be controlled or predicted. This acceptance releases guilt and self-blame, allowing peace to return. Another reason peace returns is that surrender simplifies focus. When responsibility is misplaced, attention is scattered across many worries. The mind tries to manage everything at once. Surrender narrows focus to what is required in the present moment. This simplicity reduces mental overload and restores clarity. Peace grows where focus is simplified. Placing responsibility back on God also restores emotional stability. Anxiety often causes emotional swings based on circumstances. The peace stabilizes emotions because it is anchored in trust rather than outcomes. Even when situations remain unresolved, the inner state becomes calmer. This calmness improves decision making and relationships, further reinforcing peace. Peace also returns because surrender ends the cycle of overthinking. Overthinking is driven by the belief that thinking more will create control. When responsibility is surrendered, this belief loses power. The mind no longer feels compelled to replay scenarios or anticipate every possibility. Thoughts slow down naturally, making space for rest. Surrender also deepens spiritual awareness. A peaceful mind is more receptive to guidance. When anxiety quiets, sensitivity increases. This allows the person to recognize direction that was previously drowned out by noise. Peace becomes both a result of surrender and a tool for discernment. Returning responsibility to God also heals identity. When people define themselves by success or failure, they feel responsible for everything. Surrender redefines identity around relationship rather than performance. This shift reduces pressure and restores peace. Worth is no longer measured by outcomes, but by alignment. Peace does not mean absence of challenge. Challenges remain, but their weight changes. They are faced with confidence rather than panic. This confidence comes from knowing that God carries the greater responsibility. The person participates without being overwhelmed. Surrender must be practiced consistently. Responsibility has a way of creeping back when pressure increases. Each time responsibility is consciously returned to God, peace deepens. Over time, surrender becomes a habit rather than a struggle. Ultimately, peace returns when the heart accepts that God is both willing and able to handle what the mind cannot. This acceptance quiets fear, restores balance, and renews strength. When responsibility is placed back where it belongs, peace settles naturally, not as an escape from reality, but as a stable foundation for living within it. When the mind is tired, the answer is not more thinking, but deeper trust. Mental exhaustion reveals misplaced control, and overthinking exposes fear disguised as responsibility. Trust restores order, stillness sharpens discernment, the rest realigns the soul, and surrender returns peace. When responsibility is placed back on God, the mind is freed from carrying what it was never designed to hold. Life does not become free of challenges, but it becomes calm, focused, and sustainable. In trusting God and resting in His provision, strength is renewed, clarity is restored, and peace becomes a lasting state rather than a temporary relief.